Well, Jack, I am back in the United States of America,
What's
finally.
Must be strange having been in Mexico for almost 2 weeks, was it right?
I mean, yeah, I guess so. My plane actually arrived 2 days ago, but I was in Chicago for all of yesterday. Um, I guess, you know, landing and going through all that was pretty normal. One of the, biggest surprises, one of the biggest reliefs or whatever is that, I didn't have to bomb my way through Spanish in order to talk about things. Yeah, so that's probably the biggest shock I've had. But yeah, it's really surreal to think about. Just what 72 hours ago, I was still in Mexico City.
And I know you mentioned a couple of weeks ago that one of your biggest concerns about going to Mexico was that you weren't sure whether you could get a COVID test, not knowing Spanish. I clearly that ended up fine because you were able to come back. Um, what was that
Hmm.
process like?
Well, it was it was a lot less intimidating than I thought because I talked with another friend I have in Mexico, in Monterrey, not in any of the cities I was in, so he couldn't help me directly. But so then I asked him, "Hey, what should I do?" And he was just like, "Oh yeah, just go online and make an appointment." So I went online and I made an appointment. Um, but yeah, so I made an appointment. But then I realized in my bag that, oh my god, I don't have enough money to pay for this test because it costs like what 346 pesos, which is about $17. I was
Damn.
like, oh my god, I don't have enough money, right? Um, so basically, then I had to sort of get creative. And this whole trip in Mexico, I was taking my instrument with me. A Chinese
Right.
instrument, right? An erhu, and it's something which isn't very common in Mexico. And so that's when you know the business kicks in, right?
So
So I
did you go to
casually
the
went
street and
to.
play it?
I did. I went to actually the Mexico City Chinatown because the most appropriate setting for this sort of music, and I played there for like an hour, and then I actually earned enough money
How
to
much
pay
did
for
you
the COVID
earn?
test. This time I earned like, let's see, um, how much did I earn? I think I earned about 150 pesos.
Well, that's pretty good
I
for an
had
hour.
around, yeah, it's about $7, so like just under minimum wage. But for Mexico, it's pretty good, and thankfully I was able to get my COVID test done with. Um, but yeah, that wasn't it wasn't too difficult.
But that's a good use of your $60 or whatever it was check bag on Viva Aerobus.
Oh, exactly, exactly. I mean, you know, the best business strategies, right? Spend $60 so you can go to Mexico, and then be able to earn $7 to pay for an emergency COVID test. But yeah, how have you been since
Unfortunately,
while
I've
I was in
not done as
Mexico?
many interesting trips or activities as compared to you in recent times. I've mostly been at home this entire time. I was in Napa, California, on Thursday to watch a golf tournament,
Napa.
and I
Did you drink any wine?
no, unfortunately, I'm not 21, and I didn't feel like breaking the law, so I think I'll have to wait on that. But I did get to take some transit lines home from that, which was interesting because I got to ride the Napa bus system, which I was hoping to do this summer, but never got the chance to do. So that was nice to be able to do that. But I don't really have anything else interesting going on. But I hear you do, and that you might be going to, or you are going to Wales at the end of this month.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, yes, sir. So it's confirmed about 90%. Yeah. There's a tiny chance that it won't happen, but I did, send emails to the Tallyclyn Railway, the Heritage Steam Railway in rural Wales, and they got back to me. And so, I will probably be able to go and volunteer there for the month of October. They actually, every year they start service in March and they end in at the end of October, just because winter, right? But so yeah, that'll probably be confirmed. And then afterwards, I have a cousin in Edinburgh, Scotland, so I may go up and see him, and then we may travel around Europe a bit. But I need to buy tickets to the UK fast before prices get any worse.
So what's your plan to get there? Fly. I know you mentioned that you were originally going to fly to Birmingham, and now is it you're going to fly to London and take the train?
Well, yeah, because I mean the Talyllyn Railway is in it's in Wales, yeah, in Tywyn in Wales, which is in sort of central Wales along the sea. And so the closest major city is Birmingham in the UK. But as it turns out, plane tickets to Birmingham on during this time have gotten so expensive. So it'll probably be best to fly to London. And I honestly don't know what the situation is, like what the reason is, but from like all the cities in the US, Chicago is like the cheapest one by far. Like for example, I looked at plane tickets from New York, from Washington, from even for example Dallas or Atlanta, and they all cost in the ranges of 600, 700, 800, some even approaching 1,000. But Chicago, like I'm very grateful that it's the closest one to me. But wow, Chicago is like so cheap. The plane ticket I found was only 400
20.
$24.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, on what TAP Air Portugal.
Yeah, it's interesting because my mom was looking to go to Kentucky with her aunt later in October, and that flight was almost $400, which is just barely under the flight on TAP Air Portugal, and that's not only longer but also to Europe. So that does seem like a really good deal.
Wait, just curious. Do you know where in Kentucky?
I think they had intended to go to the Bourbon Trail area, um, but I don't know about anything more specific than that.
Are you gonna go along with them?
Unfortunately, no, because it's
Hint,
during the
hint,
school year.
hint. Ah, because I live like literally Kentucky. Kentucky is like right there across the river from me.
Oh, and CBG
So,
Airport's in Kentucky, right?
oh yeah, yeah, Cincinnati Northern Kentucky Airport. It's in Kentucky.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't go on that trip, but it will be a new part of the
Ah,
country for my mom, I believe. So I'm excited to hear about that. But also,
well, if
interestingly,
you came,
then yeah, I would be
yeah.
very close and I could come by. But also interestingly, if going to Wales, you'll have flown TAP Air Portugal and been to Heathrow Airport before me, and have a TAP Air Portugal flight to SFO that I've never used.
Yeah, I mean, this will be my first time to Europe, period. Um, so that should be pretty exciting. Although it is interesting because my first trip, my first real destination in the UK, in all of Europe, will have been rural Wales. So I guess that's sort of unusual, right? Not London or Paris
I,
or Barcelona.
I guess this time you'll have to refresh on your Welsh knowledge too, which
Oh
seems
yeah.
like a very hard language to learn based on some of the train station names.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, of course. Especially, do you know the long one?
I don't want to pronounce it, but I've heard Prince or it wasn't Prince Charles. It was somebody on the uh, weather.
What's his name? Liam Dutton
I think so.
on Channel 4 News. Is it
That
Channel
sounds
4?
right.
Channel 8? Yeah. Can you say it? Give it a shot.
I don't want to give it a shot. I don't even know how to spell it. How about,
Well, yeah, spelling's hard.
do you know how to pronounce it?
Yeah, of course. It's Llanfair Pwrgwyngyll Gerch and Robach Chantasilio Gogogoch.
Damn, that's impressive.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Maybe I will be able to impress. If maybe being able to drop that in a conversation will take away from. We'll be able to slightly distract the locals from my thick American accent.
Yeah, let's hope. But anyway, I was hoping in this episode we could to shift to a different part of the world and look at Bolivia specifically, at least because I had for a couple weeks ago been really excited about the prospect of going to Bolivia or South America at some point in the near future, possibly next summer, which is probably not going to happen. But oh my God, it'd be amazing if it could. and I had envisioned trying to use as much public transport as I can to get around. And I was interested in what offerings there were, and I believe that would be something very interesting to talk about, especially because Bolivia is very unique geographically with a very high mountain range, but also it being in part of the Amazon and a wide variety of topography as well. So it seemed very interesting to research.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like we usually don't think about, when we say transit, right? We usually don't think about Bolivia. In fact, if you say anything, you usually wouldn't think of Bolivia, right? Except for, hey, what country is named Bolivia? Oh, Bolivia. Um, but the reality is, in Bolivia, there's actually an astounding variety of different types of of transit, and it's super diverse. Although I will say that when you said about next summer, maybe or maybe not, I'm pretty sure Bolivia is open to tourists, isn't it?
I'm not actually sure, but I think so. I mean, I guess at least for the U.S., a lot of countries are becoming more open to vaccinated travelers. But I haven't actually looked
Yeah,
into that
it's.
at all because I don't have any plans to go internationally until possibly next summer.
hmm Well, if you can't go to Bolivia, that would be absolutely amazing. But I mean, like, what are some places that if you could go next summer, like what are some places that would be
Well, at
interesting?
least before I looked at any just resources or example itineraries, my original uh, goals and hopes were to go to the uni salt flats because I've heard they're amazing and worth every penny that you spent to get there. But my own personal goals was to spend as much time as I could in La Paz because I had heard they had this like amazing cable car system, and it's obviously a very big city that. And having really enjoyed Lima in Peru, I thought there'd probably be some similarities. So that sounded really interesting, and I know that you spent a lot of time in Mexico City, and enjoyed that. So spending a lot of time in a big city seemed interesting to me. And then, of course, La Paz isn't the only city in Bolivia, and actually, in a lot of cases, it can be easier to fly to other cities, notably Santa Cruz de la Sierra, which also seemed interesting because it's on, I guess, completely different side of the country, with a bit different layout in some degree, and obviously less of a structured mass transit system and more of an unstructured bus system, which I was particularly interested in, having seen Lima's completely chaotic bus system, thinking maybe there'll be some similarities there. So I was hoping more to get like a bigger city vibe in Bolivia, and I hadn't really considered a lot of the smaller cities as much. But when I read a lot of the itineraries, I noticed a lot of them wanted to include maybe more day trips or 2 day trips out to Lake Titicaca, which I hadn't even considered at all. So that was something that I might throw in there.
Well, I mean, I think we can definitely tell of your interest and passion for Bolivia. I mean, I guess yeah, Titicaca is, aside from its funny name in English, um, definitely like I've seen pictures of tourists who've been to Lake Titicaca, and it seems really cool. As you said, the Uyuni salt flats, or Salar de Uyuni, those seem really amazing as well. But I mean, I think, like you mentioned, getting a big city vibe in La Paz. Um, I mean, I've noticed, for example, and this also ties in with sort of the aviation aspect, right? Um, well, La Paz is obviously the most famous because it's, literally the highest world capital in the world, highest elevation. Um, but, you know, Bolivia certainly has other major cities too, including, as you mentioned, Santa Cruz de la Sierra, as well as Cochabamba, which is sort of in the middle between those two. But it doesn't really seem like, at least online, that a lot of tourists visit those two cities. Hey, it's almost all in the west of the country. The tourism in La Paz and the Uyuni Salt Flats and Titicaca, and the rest of the mountains and deserts. Hey.
Exactly, and I wish I knew more of the specific dynamics. I mean, obviously, in terms of tourist attractions, La Paz certainly has more of that, and it's way more, I guess, cosmopolitan and bustling. And sure, you can obviously have a great time in some of these smaller cities, but they're really more, I guess, big local centers and not really as much built for tourists in a sense. And in a way, maybe that's due to La Paz having a strong cable car network that makes it easy for tourists to get around, whereas cities like Cochabamba, at least prior to 2021, and Santa Cruz de la Sierra really weren't as built for tourists, and in many cases they were more just used as, I guess, connecting airports to fly into La Paz or into Sucre or cities like that. And of course, the big draw for Bolivia probably is definitely the Uyuni Salt Flats. And from a transport perspective, it's way easier to get there, starting in either Cochabamba or La Paz. But La Paz is still far closer than Cochabamba or
Yeah.
Santa Cruz de la
Well,
Sierra.
let's actually talk about that, right? So let's imagine we're designing this trip, right? So where would you fly in to Bolivia, right? Where are the main international air hubs that you would fly into?
Well, from a North American perspective, it probably is actually easiest to fly. Well, depends on where you're starting from. Well, the way I had looked at it was I had envisioned I would go to Peru first and then fly into Bolivia. And in that case, it's way easier just to fly from Lima to La Paz because that flight operates pretty regularly and it's quick and fairly. It's not like crazy expensive either, so it's like a very doable flight.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're coming from North America, I haven't actually checked if it's possible to do it with a short connection. But you can fly nonstop from a lot of cities in North America into Panama City on Copa Airlines, and then transfer to Copa Airlines flight into Santa Cruz de la Sierra, and that is a one-stop flight, which would be fairly easy to do. Uh,
Yeah.
So I would
Yeah.
imagine
I
that
mean,
a trip to Bolivia probably starts at one of those two airports. Of course, you can also fly to Cochabamba, and they actually have a nonstop flight on Bolivia United Aviación to Madrid, as well as Santa Cruz de la Sierra, but not La Paz.
hmm so the main two international centers, the main two international airports, despite La Paz being, probably the most notable, are actually Cochabamba and Santa Cruz de la Sierra. Boliviana de Aviación operates to a lot of cities from Cochabamba, including Madrid and Sao Paulo, and it's sort of the same situation in Santa Cruz de la Sierra, but in Santa Cruz, there's actually a lot more foreign airlines that operate too. For example, Gol from Brazil, Latam from Chile and Brazil, from Chile, Brazil, and Peru. Aerolíneas Argentinas um, from Argentina, of course, and then two airlines actually serve Cochabamba. I'm sorry, Santa Cruz de la Sierra from Europe, from Madrid. Bolivian Aviación, as well as Air Europa, flies direct from Madrid to Santa Cruz de la Sierra. So that's certainly much more a much bigger aviation center. But what is also interesting is that Boliviana de Aviación also operates a direct flight from Santa Cruz de la Sierra to and from Miami in Florida. So that is, the country's only, direct connection with the United States for now, at least.
Yeah, American might
But
resume services at some point.
yeah, they used to fly to, what was it, La Paz
I
directly?
believe they flew to both La Paz and Santa Cruz. It may have been one of
Mm-hmm.
those flights that flew to La Paz first and then flew to Vidu Vidu and then back, but I don't actually remember.
Mm-hmm. 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 And well, La Paz, because of its altitude, is much less able to handle these long haul flights. But Latam flies from Chile and Peru, and um, Avianca from Colombia. So that's, I guess, sort of the aviation situation, right? Um, of course, connecting flights to and from La Paz is certainly possible. But Jack, in your case, right, what would be, so you said you would fly into Peru and then to La Paz. Um, and then what? Once you're in La Paz, right? What's the public transport situation like within the city itself? You mentioned, for example, the cable cars,
Right. At least
but
prior to 2014, it was, I guess, very stereotypical of a Latin American capital city where it essentially was just a massive system of micros and trufis, as they're called, and sorry for all the pronunciation butchering. but that mostly made up the bulk of the traffic, where you have some smaller minibuses and some larger, more taxi style minibuses, and it was.
Oh, by the way, we called those in Mexico colectivos, where it's sort of like one taxi, but it's not a taxi. It's sort of like a mini, operated as like a bus, where it's just a ton of people get in a single taxi.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's very similar to that. At least it was, and those systems still have a large presence in the city because, of course, with the cable car network, the Mi Teleférico, which I'll mention in a bit, it still doesn't cover all of the city, and for the most part goes between La Paz and El Alto. But for the other parts of the city, it's still very largely reliant on the micros and the true feeds. So, which as such in a lot of these even capitals and even smaller cities like Cochabamba are still very polluting, and there's like thousands of them on the road, so it's very congested, which is why in 2014, at least a couple of years before that, the president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, wanted to initiate this cable car system, which actually was talked about in La Paz for, I believe, since the 70s actually, because with the mountainous terrain and with the I guess the really long commute times from El Alto to La Paz, it could take up to an hour to go only like 10 kilometers or something like that. It was very hard on the residents, and it actually demographically and sociologically, most of the people that live in El Alto are generally more lower class, and the wealthier residents of the city tended to live closer to La Paz city proper. So in large part, the Morales administration wanted to build the Mi Teleférico to connect to the lower income residents in the suburb of El Alto, which ended up being this massive system that we have now, of a variety of different lines and a lot under construction, and a lot of controversy as well. But it's been quite successful.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, the system I noticed is called Teleférico, which is, the system name is literally called My Cable Car, right? Um, so it seems, it was opened in 2014, as you said, but it's I think it's super super cool because number one, right? There's not a lot of cities that have these sort of cable cars as a form of legitimate public transit, right? Um,
For the most part,
but it
they're
really
almost
does
all
make
tourists,
sense,
used for touristic purposes and ski line purposes. But South America is
right?
an exception.
Right, precisely. And La Paz is sort of like, I think, the perfect place for that because you have this really, really mountainous terrain, that makes it just really hard to be able to drive to and from places intrinsically. But because, the roads themselves are also are forced to be more narrow, the traffic in La Paz is just really horrible. And so the connectivity, as you said, between, El Alto, which is out in the western parts of the city, which is more poor, the connectivity between El Alto and La Paz proper was just really bad. Um, but now they say that there are, what is it? This, right now the system, there are 26 stations, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lines, which I think is just really amazing. Yeah, I also saw a video. Um, I also saw a video about this, and it says that they were like, um, that the usage of these cable cars is over up to and around 75,000. I'm pretty sure it said a day, which is about a tenth of the city population. Not sure if that was exact, but I think that really basically the moral of the story is that these are really utilized by a lot of the local citizens as well. It's not just another
Hmm.
tourist destination, as you said.
Yeah, it is, and it in its first 2 years, it carried 50 million passengers, and overall safe commuters 652 million minutes of traffic in these cable cars. But also, not only is it saving people time, it's also obviously saving. It's generally saving money, because the ride costs 3 bolivianos, which is about in nowadays in U.S. money nowadays about 45 cents, which is obviously very cheap. Uh, and it can be more expensive if you transfer to a bus at one of the stations because they have tried to integrate it with the local bus system, which can be a bit more expensive. But generally, uh, at least for an American, that would be cheap. Of course, Bolivia is one of the poorest countries in South America, so for many people, 45 cents could be very expensive. But of course, it's at a price such that it can support a large ridership base. But also, it's not just that it can be cheap, it also is a very almost like a luxury system in a way because each of the cable cars is equipped with solar panels to power the doors as well as pretty good lighting, but also it has Wi-Fi as well, so it's made essentially to support commuting but also potentially working for those who work digitally. So it's built very it's very passenger friendly as well as being economical.
Hmm. Yeah, and again, just a few other details. The system total has, we often think about, the sort of cable cars, these systems, as being, very limited in the capacity, especially. But the La Paz cable car system has a total of 1,398 cars themselves, and each one can carry 10 people. So, in total, right, if you filled all of them, that'd be 13,980 people that could fit in all of them collectively. Um, and they say that, each what's that? They say that, each line, right? So each of the 10 lines has about a maximum capacity of 3,000 people per hour, right? Um, so yeah, I'm actually looking at these updated figures, and it says that just three of the lines, right? The red, yellow, and the green line collectively transported between 80,000 and 90,000 passengers each day, which is just absolutely, you know, spectacular in the grand scheme of things, and it's really unique to Bolivia, to this really mountainous terrain. But one last thing, which I guess is sort of interesting, is and sort of a fun fact, is that each and all of the stations have both a Spanish name and an Aymara name, which is one of the local. Um, it's one of the two largest Native American tribes in Bolivia. So each one has both a Spanish name and an Aymara name,
That's
which is
that's
just.
really interesting because I was looking at the route map and I was trying to find some of the stations on Google Maps, and I noticed there were two names listed under it, and I thought maybe one of them. I mean,
Mm,
it looked like it was different languages, but I thought maybe one of them was more just like a street name, and then one of them was the actual station name. So I tried plugging in both, and sometimes it would take me to the station, sometimes it wouldn't. But that's actually that is very helpful in figuring that out. But it's good because actually for the most part, a lot of the Aymara population lives in El Alto, and generally the more Spanish population lives in La Paz. So it does serve a lot of both sets of populations.
mm-hmm. For sure, yeah. Um, but yeah, so the cable car system is like that in La Paz. Is there any other sort of transit related things you think are interesting that you like to see in La Paz, Bolivia?
I hope their bus system can modernize a bit. It's still largely running off of 1960s and 1970s vehicles,
Uh
and
huh.
they still are building a lot of. There's still teleférico lines under construction. I believe they're intending to get up to 11, and it looks like some of those lines are going to go to some of the eastern parts of La Paz, which I think would be great because they don't have existing cable car service. But in terms of its transport, I don't think they need really anything else. At least compared to Cochabamba, La Paz is much more is a lot higher, and the streets are way narrower and more windy. So I don't think really a light rail makes sense, or a metro. And I think generally when it comes to a planning perspective, a cable car is really quite a good match for the city. There is a lot of controversy over it and how it's cost almost $1 billion U.S. dollars, which for a country that's very poor like Bolivia, it has made a lot of people upset. But I mean, let's look at what's happened. It's worked out. It's carried a lot of people. I do want to point out that actually the frequencies is you can these cars run once every 12 seconds, so it's very easy to get on one, and it takes 10 minutes to go from La Paz to El Alto versus an hour on a bus. So I mean, I think it's incredibly worth the close to 800 million that it's cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's sort of like in Japan, where things are measured by the second instead of by the minute or the hour.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but also, just it occurred to me that the entire system that they've built, this massive cable car network, is cheaper than nearly any new sports stadium built in the U.S. or even like one new commuter or metro line. Like especially the projects I think in Denver are way more expensive than that. And in terms of its actual, I guess, material value, they pale in comparison to the Teleférico.
Well, I guess that's to be expected because the main cost is of course labor, right? Um, and wages are certainly much lower in Bolivia than they would be in Denver.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, yeah. So definitely. So you're definitely gonna need to utilize the cable car system along with much of the locals when in La Paz. Also, again, sort of a more superficial aspect, the views must certainly be amazing. Um, but yeah, so from La Paz, right? So you've wandered all throughout La Paz. You've gone in the cable cars, the crammed into the buses. Where to next?
And so, in my intention was to start Limp is more strategical, because that's where you can have a lot of the overnight buses that leave to the Salar de Uyuni leave from La Paz. So it makes it very easy to start there. And my intention was to take one of those overnight buses to Uyuni. Of course, you can also take it to Oruro and take the train, which I believe you have a lot of background on. But my intention was to get to a uni some way or another, and it appeared there was a wide variety of means to do so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, the train is definitely an option. Eh?
Yeah, I don't actually know much about what it. I know it only runs I think 2 times a week, but is it expensive, and what's the service like?
Yeah. So I actually did a little bit of research on this. So it is mostly so there are basically two trains that run in the corridor between Oruro, which is a city in Bolivia closer to the south, um, closer to the lakes of, for example, closer to the lake of Lake Poopó, um, and certainly close to the salt flats as well. The trains run between the city of Oruro and Villazon, which is all the way in the south of Bolivia, um, along the border with Argentina. Um, and it is absolutely, I think, based on looking at the pictures, that it seems absolutely amazing in terms of its, natural scenery, but also in terms of like its actual experience, right? So, there are two trains. One is called the Expreso del Sur, and one is called the Wara Wara del Sur, right, of the south. Um, one takes 16 hours and one takes 13 hours, and both trains have two weekly departures in both directions, both north and south, right? But I mean, it's sort of like your standard train, um, your standard, not high speed train. But I think, based on the videos and the photographs that I've seen, that it's absolutely amazing because it runs, just along the western side of the country. So in, sort of um, in the deserts and then afterwards into the mountains, as the train nears the border with Argentina, and the train actually does pass by the city of Uyuni, and so from there you can it's a very easy way to take advantage of that connection to and from there and the salt flats.
Hmm. I'd noticed, at least in the guides to how to get to uni, that the train is brought up as a very common way that people to can get to uni. But it does also advertise that, yeah, it only runs, I guess, 4 times a week if you count both trains. And as you pointed out, it does take quite a while to go, I guess, all the way to Via Zone, but it's still, I believe, 6 or 7 hours longer because you still have to take the bus from La Paz to Oruro first before you can connect to the train. But then again, it's a train, and it's going to be a much different experience than if you just take a bus all the way to a uni. because you get, I guess, more of a rugged view, looking at the scenery from a rail rather than a road. But what's the onboard service like? Is there different classes? Is it like Amtrak where you have sleeper compartments?
Yeah, so there are two different classes. One is the executive, one is the salon class. And so of course, it's effectively a first and the second class. They do not offer sleeper accommodations though. So that is a big point. But again, like I said, right, it's sort of like any other country, the slow trains that you can take, where there is a dining car that serves meals regularly. Um, they travel into the night, and yeah. One of the sort of, I guess, downsides of the train, compared to other more modern trains, is that there is actually no air conditioning on board, which sometimes is not needed because, for example, in the desert, for example, at night, right, or in the mountains, it can get decently cool, but there are open windows, of course. So that is the situation of the train in the western part of the country that runs from Oruro all the way down to the border with Argentina. This seems like a really cool line. I'm not sure. I'm not too sure if you can get the view of Salar de Uyuni directly from the train, but in any case, right? You're going to be going there anyways. So I think the train. I would definitely love to take this train. It seems absolutely cool, absolutely amazing.
Hmm. Yeah, when I had planned the itinerary, possible itinerary, to make that clear, I did not intend to take the train because, from a scheduling perspective, if you're trying to cram it into, I think I had picked like 12 days in July. It would make more sense just to take an overnight bus that leaves at like 10:30 p.m. from La Paz, and you get to a uni at like 5 or 6 a.m. It was actually interesting to see the disparity in bus times because some of them are only 7 hours, but then some of them are almost 12 hours. But there is quite a lot of competition on the bus routes in particular, and pricing is also quite variable. I think some are as low as $17 and some go up to $50, depending on how luxurious the ticket is. But there's definitely a lot of competition between the buses and the trains, and I think it's definitely a personal preference as to what's better. And I would imagine for people looking to spend more time in a uni and to get a better experience, the train is definitely the way to go.
So let me ask you this: do you have any plans, for your Bolivia journey to take any of the trains?
I had not planned any, because at least going into to planning what a trip could look like, I wasn't actually aware that any train existed, except for vaguely hearing about that you could take the
Ah.
train to a uni. Um, are there other like important trains I should know about?
Aha. Well, yes, there are. So Bolivia actually has four main passenger trail lines. One is the one from in the west of the country between Oruro and Villazon that passes through Uyuni. One is the one from from one of the two capitals, Sucre, the nearby town of Potosi, which sort of functions more as like some kind of like a bus system as well, a bus system on rails, right? Is how it's been described, um, which is for example, it's incredibly cheap, 25 bolivianos. It's actually it takes a 6 hour trip, but it's only 25 bolivianos, which I believe is $4 bolivianos. No, sorry, yeah, $3.60. So it's incredibly cheap, but it's sort of a more generic like local train. The third main train is one from Santa Cruz de la Sierra, also all the way down to the Argentine border, um, which also, at least to my knowledge, is sort of another, generic train. It runs in and along sort of some of the mountains and some of the more greener parts of the mountains. Um, it's actually surprisingly difficult to find information on this route, um, and also the one before that, right? So there's those three, and then the fourth line, which also seems really really interesting per se, is the Death Train. as aptly called, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm sure, as you can guess, right, it's a train that you die on. Um, of course, not because it's just a name, but it is the train that runs from Puerto Quijarro, which is on the border in the far east of the country with on the border with Brazil, and it runs starting there from sort of the more flatter parts of the country through the rainforest as well, out west into the city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra, um, and this train seems really cool based on the accounts that I've read as well, because it's it's definitely another cheap experience. Um, and the reason it's called the Death Train um, is because back in the 20th century and before then, right, this train used to be the system by which sick people with yellow fever were transported to and from, um, transported to remote camps, right,
Huh.
away from the big cities to be treated. But nowadays, there's no more yellow fever, and this train line between the border with Brazil and Santa Cruz de la Sierra is still up and running.
That's
So
interesting.
yeah.
At least because from my perceptions of Bolivia, obviously in the videos I've watched and in the itineraries I've read about these other trains with like the death train and the train to Sucre and Potosi, those aren't really advertised as much as I guess for touristic purposes. And maybe
No, they're not advertised like nearly at all.
is it mostly are these trains mostly just for locals to use, and how often do they run?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, the Death Train too. It's the accounts and the videos that I've seen. They all state that the train is um, definitely sort of the local for local purposes, connecting people in the rural outskirts of the country. Well, some parts of the rural outskirts of the country into the big city of Santa Cruz de la Sierra. Um, and yeah, because of that, um, it's not how do you say this? It's not a touristy experience at all. They're not charging you higher prices, and they're also not giving you more luxuries. Um, in terms of how often some of these trains run, especially for example the the what is it, the Sucre to Potosi train, and the southern route that goes from Santa Cruz de la Sierra. It's surprisingly difficult to find information on those. Like I said, just because of the nature of it not being a super touristy route. Um, of course, being in Bolivia and being not a tour, being for locals, the primary mode of purchasing tickets for these is to physically go to the train station and buy a ticket, right?
Right.
Um, so it's a lot of the information isn't easily accessible on the internet, but uh, to my knowledge, in my research that I've done, the trains are all still running, and when you make it to Bolivia, you can find out for yourself, find out and tell us.
Well, these kind of trains seem like the kind of trains I'd be interested in riding. I do try to avoid tourist trains as much as I can and to seek
Mm-hmm.
out, I guess, the more authentic trains. I mean, of course, I've never really been to a country where there's a huge divide between tourist trains and authentic trains, but I think that's probably more evident in Bolivia. So yeah, hopefully, I did not plan on using any of those other trains while in Bolivia. I guess I'd have to get to either Potosi or Sucre or take one of them from Santa Cruz de la Sierra, but I have not found a
Mm-hmm.
way to do that yet in a 12-day time frame.
Yeah. Well, definitely, yeah. But so, back to the trip, if you were to make one, as we were making, what would you be your plan after making it to Uyuni? The Solar de Uyuni?
Yeah, so I had intended to spend some time in a uni, and I figured I really wanted to go to Cochabamba. One of my teachers at school did a study abroad program there, and it sounded really cool just being able to spend 6 months in a city like that. So that seemed like someplace I wanted to go to, and also they do now have a light rail being constructed and run. I believe I've heard very different reports. They say it's going to open later in the year, but I've also seen it running a bit. So the system will be operating at a higher capacity by the end of the year. So I had hoped that I could spend maybe 1 or 2 days in Cochabamba. So my plan was to take an overnight bus from Uyuni to Cochabamba, which is, I believe, 12 hours long, depending on the bus company, which I was a bit surprised by, given that it's much closer to Uyuni than La Paz. But then when I looked in Google Maps, I realized the road was quite windy. So
Oh yeah.
eventually I would end up in Cochabamba again on an overnight bus.
Yeah. And so what about after? What about after Cochabamba?
Then my plan was to fly to Santa Cruz de la Sierra and to spend 1 day there, and then eventually I'd go to Colombia after that. But I wanted to
Oh.
check out both of those cities and experience them in some amount of depth. But I also was interested in the domestic flight from Cochabamba to Santa Cruz de la Sierra, and to check out like what either Boliviano de Aviación is like or Amazonas, which also operates that flight.
Well, you know what they say, like I've read like online, some people have done is that they've utilized the trains as well. Like they actually started their journey flying to, for example, Sao Paulo in Brazil, and then by buses getting all the way to the Bolivian border, and then from there taking the train into Santa Cruz de la Sierra, and then basically going the other direction, right? From there, making their way to Cochabamba or to Salar de Uyuni, and then to La Paz, and then from La Paz going out west some more. So I've also seen that as,
That would be
utilizing the
that's
trains.
fascinating because in some I could start the way I did, and then I could go from Santa Cruz de la Sierra and take the train to Corumba. Yeah, Corumba, is that what it is? On the border,
Hmm.
and then go out to Sao Paulo. And I would love to spend time in Sao Paulo too. Of course, we did the episode on Brazilian aviation. Maybe it's not on Spotify anymore, but at some point we intended to do that, and so I hope that we can spend. I would love to spend time in Bolivia at some point, and as well as Brazil together, ideally. And if I could do that, that'd be great. But of course, time is not always going to be there. But that would be interesting to take the train to the border.
Hmm. Definitely, definitely. I mean, yeah, this definitely seems like Bolivia is certainly a massive country with a lot of these different options. Um, what about, like, for example, other of these explicit tourist destinations, right? So we said Salar de Uyuni. Is there anything else, for example, in the mountains or the rainforest that you think would be cool for such a trip?
In terms of Bolivia, I'm not actually familiar with much of the tourist destinations. At least to me, I've only heard of the Salar de Uyuni as the main tourist attraction, and I guess there is Lake Titicaca, uh, which is I guess also an attraction, and a lot of people seem to want to spend a couple of days there, and look and spend time and look at the lake, and because it is a very nice lake, of course, being quite big too. So that would be probably someplace I'd want to spend more time at that I didn't include. And then there is the Amazon too, which I didn't even factor in at all. I didn't even go north from La Paz at all in this itinerary that I had created. So maybe if I wanted to diversify my trip and to spread the love, I guess maybe I would go north.
Spread the love. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. Like, for example, as we mentioned, right, the transit to and from the big cities into the rest of the country is, not non-existent, we shall say, right? There are plenty of buses that go to and from, La Paz, Cochabamba, Santa Cruz de la Sierra, and into the desert or into the rainforest. Again, what I know, based on the abundance of other people's testimonies, is that they've taken buses from La Paz up north into the rainforest as a half of their trip, right? So into the rainforest, they stay in um, these tiny towns that are in the rainforest, um, do all the things, swim in the rivers, go on the boats, and look at the animals, the capybaras, and then afterwards take the bus, return to La Paz, and then go in the other direction, right? Go into the desert to Salar de Uyuni, and they sort of split it up half, utilizing the country's sort of extensive extensive bus network, but also I've also seen some that utilize the buses into the rainforest, but also again the train into the desert. So sort of all the whole experience, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I was really impressed by the amount of bus options there are in the country, because there's so many different providers and they're fairly cheap for an overnight bus. It could be like $20, and a lot of these buses actually offer lie flat seats that you can sleep on, and it's not that
Mm.
much. It's only like $20 or $30. I think the most expensive being 50 to 60. So in a lot of cases, these buses are a really economical way to get around the country, especially to the north where the flight services are not as prevalent. Uh, but I hadn't considered the north as much, and I haven't really even considered going to the Amazon at all. Just in general, even to the Brazilian Amazon or the Peruvian parts. So that's something I should consider, and I didn't beforehand.
Mm. Well, I guess sort of the last thing that we should probably discuss is connections with other countries, and the short answer for that is, yes, there are connections to all the other countries around Bolivia by bus, and also by train if you're going to, well, to the border if you're going to Argentina and Brazil, as we mentioned, right? So for example, there's plenty of buses that go to and from the big cities into for example, there's plenty of buses that go to and from Lima and La Paz, right? There's some buses that go to and from Santa Cruz de la Sierra and into Brazil and Paraguay, not into the larger cities, not into Santiago, Buenos Aires, or Rio de Janeiro because they're slightly very very far, um,
It's like
slightly very
a
very
Greyhound
far.
across the
Yes,
U.S.
yeah, precisely, yeah. Not exactly, super amazing. But to the cities that are closer to Bolivia, for example, from La Paz to Arica, Chile, which is sort of in the far north of the country, on the ocean. I know there's a lot of people who do that as well, right? They start in La Paz and then they take the bus to Arica in Chile, and see the ocean, see the territory that used to be Bolivia's. Um, but yeah, and then as we mentioned, right, the trains, the two train lines which go to the Argentinian border, and then from there you can take other buses, and also the Argentine rail network into Argentina, and also to Brazil, where you can take buses to from the city of Corumba all the way to the rest of Brazil. Um, but
I
yeah,
had originally intended,
I
actually, in
guess.
my the first iteration of how I drew up this trip was to, I wanted to start in Lima, like I mentioned, and then
Mm-hmm.
I had originally envisioned that or at least I'd heard that the flights from Lima to La Paz aren't common enough that you could get there on a specific day. So I originally was just only looking at overnight buses, and it was like 17 hours or something larger than that, because there's only one non-stop bus between Lima and La Paz, I believe, a week or one or two. But for other days, most of them would either go through Arequipa, and then even the buses in Arequipa. Actually, I believe it was 17 hours from Arequipa, and it was like over 30 from Lima, because it is quite far. But you would often have to stop in Puno, in Peru, which also was not very or as convenient. But there's definitely a lot of options in from Peru.
Well, you know what is another option? Right nearby from La Paz on the Peruvian side, well, relatively nearby, is Cusco and Machu Picchu, eh?
So you're saying that it'd be worth it to go there as well?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is that because they sort of lie between Lima and La Paz, uh, that could be an itinerary as well if you're coming from Peru, Lima, and head over there. And then I know for sure that from Cusco and well, yeah, from Cusco and nearby Machu Picchu, there are buses which run into Bolivia. Not too sure if they stop in Arequipa or somewhere else, but or Puno, as you said. But that I guess that would sort of be on the way, right?
Yeah,
Utilizing the
it would be
buses
very
once
easy
again.
to do that. And the buses from Lima to Cusco are common, and you can fly there as well. There's also a lot of cheap flights in that regard, and you can take the bus. But I have
Mm-hmm.
been to Cusco when I went to Peru previously, so I wasn't initially
Oh,
considering that. But I would love to go back and go there not with a school, because in some ways doing it with the school kind of ruined the purpose of the trip. Because they put me into an art group, and I was really not really looking at or caring about the art, and I really wanted to just walk around the city and do like traditional activities, which we did to some extent, but I generally prefer traveling with my family or by myself or with other people that actually like want to travel for the purpose of traveling and not for a school trip.
well, yeah. Traveling by yourself, I can attest, is really cool. Uh, and if you want someone to travel with, let's go. Let's go to Bolivia. Um,
That would be
yeah,
awesome.
but I guess, yeah, let's go. As long as you pay for
Well, actually,
everything. Kind of broke right
I
now.
did assemble a spreadsheet of how much this would all cost, and let me see if I can find that really quickly. But it was more expensive than I had, I guess, anticipated. Particularly, well,
Well,
as I
yeah,
mentioned, I had intended to start in
they're always like
I
that.
had intended to start in Peru, go to Bolivia, spend the most time in Bolivia, and then go to Colombia. The problem is flying into Bolivia and flying out of Bolivia was the most expensive. It was based on the days I had selected. It was what was it? It was $285 to fly from Santa Cruz de la Sierra to Bogota, which seemed like a decent deal just because that flight only operates a couple times a week, and if it's not operating, you have to pay like way more than that to stop somewhere for 20 hours for a layover. So that seemed like the only logical option. Of course, I could probably try to take some buses, but that would take forever. And then it was also $125 to go from Lima to La Paz, which seemed a bit expensive to me, especially because the bus was only, I think, $50. So the bus is obviously going to be a better deal, but since I was trying to fit it into 12 or 13 days, the flight made more sense. But overall, when I added up the prices of just the transport, excluding whatever the teleférico cost, it was 1,201 for all flights. And this is starting in San Francisco and ending in San Francisco.
Why not just take? That seems a bit too high. I mean, well, first of all, right? Just my humble opinion. Grouping Colombia with these countries kind of doesn't really make sense. Also, utilize the overnight buses, man. Like for example, from Lima to La Paz. Like even when I'm going to the UK, right? I already looked at the prices between for example, London to Edinburgh, right? I'm taking the overnight bus. It's like $100 train, or $150 train. I'm sorry, or an $18 overnight bus, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I totally think it's preferable not to include Colombia in it, but I had envisioned that I'm probably not going to go to South America twice in a short period of time, and my goal was to spend most time in Bolivia because that's where I mostly want to go to. But I also am always I've been very interested in the Transmillennial BRT system, so I wanted to experience that if I was nearby. I don't know if it's worth spending $285 and then also having to
no,
fly
it's
back to
not.
Lima, but. Uh, I mean, if you take that out of the equation, the flights were better than I expected because it was 400. Oh, actually, I put Lima in the itinerary to begin with because it's way more expensive to fly anywhere else in South America from San Francisco. For some reason, it was 450 round trip from San Francisco to Lima with a stop in Los Angeles, which was the cheapest you can get for the entire year. Uh, so that was a decent deal, and then the rest of it, I guess, is fairly
Really?
average.
You know what we could do? Do the thing that I said. Start in Lima, head to Bolivia, and then cross the other side of the country to Brazil. Yeah, I'm looking at prices. Like for example, choosing a random day, not too near into the not too far into the future. 356 one way from Sao Paulo to San Francisco.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Oh, and it stops in Bogota.
Except that the flight I had found was 454 round trip from San Francisco to Lima. So I guess uh, going to Brazil might be worth that extra cost. And I think it was 300 something just to go one way to Lima. But
Not for
but
Brazil,
Brazil is
for
is
that for the train.
yeah, the train and then the buses and whatnot. But it's Brazil.
Mhm. Yeah, fifth biggest country in the world. So
But these buses really are a good deal because I had put down here it was $18 to go from La Paz to Uyuni. It was $17 to go from Uyuni to Cochabamba. And then the flight from Cochabamba to Santa Cruz de la Sierra was $47 on Bolivia and Aviación. So pricing wise, it was in
Wow,
Bolivia.
you really planned this out, huh?
I plan the transit. I don't plan anything else because the transit is what's interesting.
All right, I'll plan everything else if you take me.
I first have to figure out what I'm doing next summer anyway. But this would be awesome to be able to check out Bolivia because that's
Hit me up, call me up next summer. I'll go. Just be like, hey, let's go, and I'll be like, I'm coming.
yeah,
See you in 5.
would be awesome if that could happen. But yeah. Anyway, this concludes our episode on looking at Bolivia trip and more specifically on transit in Bolivia because this is obviously transit talk and hopefully. We intended to cover a variety of transit modes from buses to planes to the teleférico. And clearly, Bolivia transit is actually flourishing right now with a lot of construction projects, and hopefully it continues that way in the future with the new presidential administration starting from 2020.